Hey, everybody. We're back for our second recording for the Bible cohort, where we're exploring the story of the Bible together. And again, I've got Meredith, Scott, and Matt with me.
Hey.
And today we talk about Exodus, the second book of the Bible. And let's start here. Guys, what's it like to read the book of Exodus?
I feel like reading the book of Exodus is like reading an even crazier adventure book, right? So if Genesis is kind of like an adventure book, like Exodus is like, I find it, and I don't know if this is true with you, but I think it's the easiest Old Testament book to read.
Of the Torah or of all the Old Testament?
I'm going to go and say the whole Old Testament.
Oh, okay.
Oh, wow. I would pick something different.
Okay. But it makes your
Zephaniah,
top
obviously.
five.
It does, yes.
Okay.
Top five.
Because
We all have top five lists. We all know.
Top five easiest books to read.
We could spend this whole time debating top five easiest books to read. But no,
Is that what this podcast is for?
We'll do that.
We'll do that in class.
Oh, there you go.
But the reason is because there's so much action. Like, it's continually moving. It's the book that I feel like when I ask my kids to like read through the Bible, right? Like Genesis is like they're kind of getting their sea legs. They're kind of like, okay. There's like stuff going on. They kind of used to it. And then they hit Exodus and they're like, oh, okay, like things are moving. And they have, questions and there's a story and, things are really engaging.
And then you hit Leviticus.
Yeah.
We'll get there next.
Not top five.
Yeah. Easiest, not top five easiest.
Yeah. But it's also, so part of it's just on the surface of it, right? It's an exciting story. But secondly, it's also reading the central event of the entire Old Testament, right? The entire Old Testament just repeat, and we'll talk about this more and more, but it just refers back to it over and over and over again. And so there's not just a ton on the surface. There's like a ton every layer you go down. And so your 30th time reading it, it's still like, real, even if you're like, oh, I know the story, but there's a lot there. It's an incredible adventure story.
Yeah, it's so much more zoomed in. Genesis, we really hopped from person to person to person, and then you get to really live in Moses' story for a nice long amount of time. And that's just so rich with detail.
Yeah, I think you're right up until they get to like all of the rules and regulations.
The instruction manual section.
Okay.
Like
It's sort of shoehorned in there.
It's kind of like a pre-Leviticus, they give you a little foretaste of what's to come. I mean, but that part is fascinating to me towards the end because you get a lot of. I guess it's broken up into like the epic Exodus portion, that side, and then the portion of establishing of the worshiping of God's people, and that portion I think is fascinating in of itself. So I guess there's kind of a two sides.
I'm just saying by that point you've got some momentum.
You got some momentum. It carries you through.
Exactly.
You're like, oh, there's no Red Sea here. It's just blue and purple colored
pomegranates
thread
and bells and very.
There's a reason that the movies stopped.
Right about there.
Can you imagine the Prince of Egypt go through
Exodus Part 2?
That's right.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, and that all makes sense of, what this book is. Exodus means leaving, and the whole book's about leaving, slavery in Egypt. Because Genesis, if you remember, leaves us with Abraham's descendants, who are now known as Israel, because Jacob is renamed by God to be Israel. So Israel has 12 sons, and they become the tribes of Israel. And there, because one of those sons, Joseph, ends up in Egypt through all those circumstances we talked about last time, the whole set of people that God made these promises to, and through whom God would bless the world, are in Egypt. And then, this new Pharaoh, which is a king, they just call him pharaohs in Egypt, doesn't know Joseph. He comes and they're all enslaved. And then the book covers how God rescues his people from that slavery by using Moses and Aaron and plagues and a miracle at the Red Sea. And then, like you said, Matt, it covers some time after where they get the 10 Commandments at Mount Sinai and they get instructions on worship and some events after that. And so really, you have Exodus being God rescuing his people from slavery and continuing to make them his. They're not going to serve Pharaoh. They're going to serve God. And again, it's like Genesis, mostly narrative. It just continues the stories of God's people as they continue to see him work out his promises to redeem the world through Abraham's descendants. A lot of famous stories that we'll probably talk about. The burning bush is in Exodus, the 10 plagues, the parting of the sea, the 10 commandments, the golden calves, that's all in Exodus. and a lot of stories that show up later in Scripture that aren't well known. So you have like, the Exodus idea itself, we'll talk about that, shows up a lot later in Scripture, and Scott, you alluded to that. But God feeding people manna in the wilderness is in Exodus. God giving them water from a rock is in Exodus. God showing his glory to Moses and that famous revelation, the Lord, that's in Exodus too. And the structure then just kind of revolves around that. So when you're reading Exodus, you're reading that structure, this idea of leaving Egypt, where you start enslaved and you end on the way towards the promised land as God's own people. And in the midst of that, you see not just their victories, but also their sin. So there's like the snapshot of the book. So in the midst of all of that, what's one part of this book that stood out to you?
I just love the way that the whole book kicks off and how many women are involved in getting Moses in position to like bring the people out of Egypt. There's these midwives who defy Pharaoh, his sister and his mother who hide him in a basket, Pharaoh's own daughter who gets involved. It's like a whole cast of characters. And I think that part has just always been so precious to me, the way in which they play such an important part in supporting Moses and really setting the tone for what's going to happen next.
I think that's really cool. I think that's actually going to be probably a theme that will carry throughout the entirety of this series as we sort of keep an eye on some of the characters that maybe our modern world would see as sided characters. God's using them for powerful, beautiful purposes for his glory. I always love, I know it's towards the end, but the big stories are always super compelling to me. The 10 plagues, super compelling, all that. But I've always been fascinated by the golden calf. In chapter 32, Aaron making this golden calf. Like after all that, and how quickly the people kind of turn against God and start trusting in idolatry. Maybe there's just something about idolatry that is a compelling thought to me as I think about the human heart and how it's drawn towards other things. And there's some just great phrases like, Aaron says, so they gave it to me, I threw it into the fire, and out came this calf. Like there's like these like phrases.
That's a laugh out loud.
It's so good. Like you're like reading it, you're like you can imagine him saying that. Like it's like not a confession by any stretch of the imagination or any sort of honesty. It's like blame shifting a lot. It's very similar to what we've seen, the patterns that we've seen from Genesis 3 all the way through and all the way up until today. And so I think that part is fascinating to me, to see the people of God turn back, to see Moses intercede on behalf of the people. And really, Moses intercedes on behalf of the people and points God back to the promise God made and said, God, you made this promise not to destroy these people. You're going to do something here through them, through their descendants. You're going to bless all the families of the earth, like you said to Abram. You're going to, like, he's basically saying, God, keep your promise. And I think that's a compelling even posture for us as we think about not like, arguing with God, but the compelling posture of like trusting God and believing that he's going to keep his promises, even when things look very opposite to that in life. And so that's really compelling to me.
One of the things that stood out to me is actually in that latter half as well. And maybe Brian will leave the actual story of the Exodus, which we haven't talked about yet, to you. But right after that, in chapter 20, God gives them the 10 Commandments. Right. And then he gives them these other rules. And I think it's easy to skip over that and be like, oh, okay, I guess there's some rules. Yeah, kind of some like a preview of Leviticus. One of the things that's always struck me is that when he gave them those rules, the first things he was concerned about were the poor and the marginalized. Like in chapter 21, he talks about slaves and he talks about those that are like the most destitute. In 22, he talks about sojourners and how to care for and minister to and be, because you were sojourners, like it established this, not just something to look back on, but it established this ethic. Like this is your identity. People who have sojourned, who have wandered and who have come out of slavery. And so in light of that, that should shape not just how you view God, but how you view others, how you view others under slavery or sojourners or the poor around you. And it just kind of has this echo that I think I'm not going to try to find it, but he says because God hears them all, right? God hears them all. And I think, to me, this is not unrelated to that theme of suffering and difficulty from Genesis, that it gets put on display here after 400 years of, the gap between Genesis and Exodus, right? Is 400 years of suffering. And a part of the theme there is that God heard his people, right? He hadn't forgotten them. He heard them. He knew them, and he was for them. And I feel like that's echoed even in the just like the Exodus, the 10 Commandments get all the press, right? Like, oh, those are the rules, and they are. But then he drills down a little bit about how to live that out, and I just think that's fascinating.
I think that's a helpful way to read the book, or I guess a helpful tip on how you ought to read a book like Exodus, because you do have this very adventurous section in the beginning, and then it's like, here's some threads for the priest garment, and like, look out for the poor. Yeah. And then there's the pomegranates for these designs for these different, tabernacles and things. And it can feel like that's disjointed. And you can, again, if you go a chapter a day, most Christians read small chunks, every day is the idea that most people have been given. And you don't have to do that, but if that's what you're doing, you can forget the connections between these things. And it's helpful to remember those. Again, the big story makes sense of the smaller stories. And in Exodus particularly, you have God delivering his people from serving Pharaoh to serving him. From, in those days, what would be expected is worshiping Pharaoh to worshiping him. And so all of those commands, and we'll see this in Leviticus as well, but it's really poignant in Exodus, are ways that you see God being a good ruler over his people, giving them good and beautiful and right instruction for how to worship him. And if you want to read deeper and deeper, and if you have a study Bible, then you might find things like, oh, these pomegranates relate back to like the Garden of Eden. There's all these other kind of crazy connections. But the point is that God's making something beautiful for how his people can relate to him instead of them being enslaved to Pharaoh. And so I find that that stands out to me. But I also got left with, I guess I'll take the miracles. But I do think that, you look at those miracles and you go, okay, this is the length to which God will go to rescue his people. And there's something really powerful when you remember they're not just shows of force. There are a bunch of things, right? Again, you have a study Bible, you'll look at some of the notes and it'll be like, oh, these actually match up to the Egyptian gods and like their powers over, the Nile or over, the locusts or things like that. And God showing, I'm the God, like who does all things. And, I'm the one you ought to worship. But even behind some of those really cool, rich details, all of those just feed that main story of look at what God will do to get his people out of slavery. He hears them and he acts, doesn't just hear. So that being said, what does this book teach us today? As we look at all those things we just said and maybe more, what are some lessons that we can draw?
Well, I think the lesson of redemption, right? So I think about redemption, the term that comes to mind a lot is this sort of like the price you paid to set someone free from slavery, right? There's this sense of like you read about redemption in the New Testament. You read about God has redeemed us. He's redeemed us. He's redeemed us. It always comes back to Exodus over and over and over again. It's this sense of in our relationship with God, he is a God who sets us free from our slavery. There's something so compelling about that all the details work into it, and all of it is a real historical story that also is a picture of our salvation. It's a picture of what it means to be a follower of God. He sets you free from slavery to sin. He sets you free from all of the things that come with that, the guilt, the shame, the death that comes with that we've seen. And he sets you free to lead you and to be your ruler when these other rulers abuse you, when the things of this world treat you poorly, when everything of this world, whether it's the spiritual leaders of this world or the world itself here physically in this world are unjust and evil and lead you astray. He's a God who sets us free. And so I think about a lot of what, I don't know, like there's like something so compelling about the idea of freedom. And Jesus talks about this a lot as well, like that he's setting us free. And the freedom to lead into the promised land, the freedom to be led by God, to be near to him, to be trusting in him, to be clinging to him, to be needing him for your daily bread, to be needing him for the hope of this ultimate promise that he's going to bring you, that he's going to lead you into this other place and he's going to be your God and you will be his people, is just such a compelling picture of salvation and the Christian life that is so rich and vibrant for me as I think about and read this story.
Yeah, I think that's so compelling. And I think that comes from seeing in this story that the God of the story and the things that we see about God, that he's a God who keeps his promises, that he's a God who hears his people, is the same God that we worship, that we know. And so I think making that connection, and you made the other connection, which is that these people are a lot like us too, or we are a lot like these people. And I think when you make both of those connections, that this is our God and we are a lot like these people, the relevance for today is everywhere. One of the things that stood out to me in light of that was just the number one, you see God's people complaining a lot, right? You see the golden calf, you see their idolatry, you see their impatience and things like that. One of the things that struck me the last time I more recently read through this was that they began complaining like right away. They complained before they got to the Red Sea. They were this wasn't like, oh, God leads them out of Egypt and then he parts the Red Sea, and 10 years in, they're like, you know what, this is kind of getting hard. This is like God giving you a house and like complaining about it as you're like moving in. You're carrying boxes in, and
which
you're like,
is not like so enough. Unfamiliar,
right?
like some of you are moving into apartments right now, and like, I don't know, sure.
Yeah. And so I think that.
Not meant to condemn you,
No, but that connection with our heart, and that God redeems. I mean, the story also shows how gracious he is. The story also shows how patient he is. But it in a fascinating way exposes my heart, particularly in moments like that, where it exposes my heart as complaining, just as God is preparing to do the next thing, and just on the heels of the last thing he did. So we'll see this theme throughout the entire Old Testament, but we're so forgetful, like almost immediately forgetful. And God's repeated call to us is to remember. And I mean, it's fascinating because throughout the rest of the Old Testament, his calls to remember this is to remember our redemption. It's to remember our salvation. Like at the core of not following their lead is not forgetting and remembering the salvation, the redemption of the Lord. And I feel like when I make those connections, then this book just sparkles with implications. I mean, you see them on every page then.
There's something comforting to that too. Like, I mean, we'll see it in other books of the Bible for sure, but here it's just abundantly clear that these people aren't rescued because they happen to be the morally superior group of people. There's not really a like, oh, because, it's not because you make bricks well, or because you like have to be way better than the Egyptians, or like you get it and they don't. And yet God does it anyway. And there's something really comforting to notice. I complain all the time. Like there's a lesson that in the midst of that complaining, the God of Exodus is coming in and saying, "Yeah, I rescue you anyway." And I deliver you to something different than that, but I'm not going to stop rescuing you because you happen to fall into this pattern again. We've seen that pattern over and over. I mean, the golden calves, again, one of the things when you read the Bible, a good question to ask, especially in narratives, is where have I heard this before? And when you look at the golden calves, and Aaron says, I just threw it in there and it just came out like this. And do you not hear Adam saying, this woman who you gave to be with me, I was like, wasn't me. It just happened to, be this way. And then what does God do after that? He renews the covenant. And what does God do after, Adam and Eve? He makes the first promise. And it's just kind of an amazing thing that gives you comfort and challenge to grow in a better way.
Yeah. There's really kind of they're the people who I feel like I can resonate with. And then I think there's also this very important warning about Pharaoh and what it means to truly harden your heart against God, and the contrast between God's heart for caring for the people and Pharaoh's heart to control power and do things his own way, and the devastating consequences of truly trying to make yourself king in your own world. Obviously, he had the actual power in kind of a more literal sense, but we are also tempted in the same way to try to control our circumstances, to want to do things our own way. And when you deliberately sear your consciousness against God's ways, it's not going to go well for you. It really does not for Pharaoh.
You think of the beauty of you can't do hypotheticals with the Bible, and there's dynamics to Pharaoh's heart and God's hardening that are complicated and you want to respect, right? But simultaneously, just sort of that alternate world where Pharaoh just doesn't dig in his heels like one last time, and what God might have done with that. Again, you can't talk that way really, but gosh, you think about how willing God is clearly to rescue sinful people, and what it would mean to see him. The beauty of what happens when people repent is a beautiful thought to think about, despite all the complications of trying to do hypotheticals with Scripture. I'm gonna drop a couple more just because I have a couple that I love. One is Exodus shows you God in a way that you didn't see in Genesis necessarily. Like it's a unique way. It's not a different God, obviously, but God speaks more about himself in Exodus than he does in Genesis. So in the burning bush, you have the name of God is given, and the things that people have drawn out just by meditating on what it means that God's name is I am that I am, or I am, is legion and beautiful and worthy of contemplating. But at the very end, not at the very end, but close to the end, in Exodus 34, where that piece of God's glory, sort of like like the back of God's glory, passes by Moses, and he has that famous line, the Lord, a God merciful and gracious, slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness, keeping steadfast love for thousands, forgiving iniquity and transgression and sin, but who will by no means clear the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children and the children's children to the third and fourth generation. And Moses just bows his head and worships. And that's just a confounding God. That's just a God that's bigger than you. And he tells you who he is in a way that's both beautiful and awe-inspiring. And that's something that I think is just a lesson for us. That's who God is. It's who the God of this universe, the God of this world, the God who you worship is an awe-inspiring, loving, beautiful, revealing God. And what an amazing lesson that is. And right with that, you get this amazing, Scott pointed this out earlier, the way that God talks about how you treat other people in the back half of the book of Exodus is keyed almost every time, or at least many times, off of how he treated them. And so there's always this way that God's actions in redeeming you are the way that you're supposed to mirror in your relationships, in your life. And I think there's lessons for that all over the place as we think about how we treat others and think about others and understand other people and the world we live in by looking back at the kind of God that rescues us when we didn't deserve it. How does that push us out into the world? It pushes us out in the way that you mentioned, Scott. Like we serve the poor and we care for those who don't deserve it, and we love even our enemies. It just makes sense of the whole Bible's ethic of love in certain ways to see God's rescue pushed out into our way of living in the world.
You're talking about how much information or how much God shares about himself. And I was really struck this time reading through about how much FaceTime, like literal FaceTime, Moses seems to get with God, and how
like
much
shining. He's so
yes, like he's conversing with him and God is speaking to him. So I don't know if it's the most of any character, but it really stood out as quite a lot of dialogue between the two of them. And I was finding myself feeling very envious, like, man, I wish I could sit and have that kind of FaceTime with God. And then I realized we have pages and pages and pages of God's words that we're about to read together. We do, in a sense, have more words than what are recorded for Moses. We really get a chance to hear from God directly. And that really kind of blew my mind.
That's beautiful. And that's a great connection to the last question we always ask, which is how does this book connect us to Jesus? All roads lead to him. What are some of those roads in Exodus?
There's so many.
Yeah.
So many.
I mean, I think about towards the end of the book. I mean, there's a lot, but I think about it towards the end of the book and some of the rules and regulations on worship and the institution of atonement and sacrifice as like a fundamental aspect of what it means to be worshiping. A lot of the towards the end of the book is outlining specific rules about, the ram is killed and then the ram's breast is grabbed by the priest and they do a wave offering with it. So that I'm assuming they wave it. I don't know. They wave it into the air and then that's what they get to eat. There's like all these very specific rules about these things. But it introduces this need for sacrifice as a regular habitual pattern for God's people that I think comes up all over the place through the rest of the Old Testament and leads us to Christ directly as the ultimate sacrifice. So that's, one thing towards the end of the book. And there's a million others earlier on too.
I really love the parallel here of the redemption out of literal slavery and the way in which that connects to the Christ's deliverance of our slavery to sin. And the people are so oppressed. They are so cast down and discouraged. And the redemption is able to create such a beautiful new life for them, one they don't appreciate, and it takes a while. And yet, when we look at what Christ has done for us and the redemption that he offers, that is both in the moment and about face, and also a long journey of growing us and taking us through new places and bringing us ultimately to himself. I think that piece of the story really shines powerfully for me.
Yeah.
I mean, you were talking about how there's like this deep personal relationship that God has with the people in this time. And it's a lot of that's in the redemption and then after the redemption. It's like he leads you out of slavery into his presence, into his closeness. And it's such a beautiful picture.
Yeah. And there's obviously the Passover lamb, right? And not unrelated to the sacrifice on Mount Moriah, that now a lamb is going to be slaughtered, and under its blood actually is going to be the sign that is the sign of deliverance and the means of deliverance, so that the judgment that is coming to the entire nation will be God's people who are sealed by the blood will be passed over and redeemed out of slavery through it. I mean, the connections are unreal, and you could sit and meditate and just wrestle through the implications of that in so many different ways for so long. And there's the fact, I mean, it's not the same, but it's even parallel. The New Testament, like in Acts 3, talks about how Jesus is a new and better Moses, right? That just as Moses was sent from God to deliver his people, Jesus has been sent. But he's not, he's kind of like Moses, but he's a new and better Moses, right? He's the one who, he's going to not just use the Passover lamb, he's going to become the Passover lamb, right? It's not just going to deliver us out of earthly slavery, but in eternal slavery. He's not just going to deliver us to the promised land as a nation, but in a eternal sense. And so I think even when you read, that touches down in all of these different things, when you read the entire Exodus story, this is why this story gets referenced so often, because it encapsulates, and in the Old Testament, it is the kind of premier story of God's redemption and salvation that, in one sense, from an Old Testament perspective, is the ultimate redemption. But in light of Christ, we see that it was actually just a shadow. It was just a shadow of an even greater redemption that was coming.
Yeah, the deliverance, and there's also the priest connection too.
Yeah.
Moses and his brother Aaron, and the setup of the priest and all the rules of the priest. And Jesus comes in and is able to be a high priest above and beyond anything that they could offer in connecting us in a very real way to Christ, so that we can be in his presence.
Yeah, those are the ones that always stand out to me. I mean, when you get to the back of the book and you got Moses doing all of this mediating, it's interesting because the people come and they're really scared. Like it's not like this, oh, good, we're here with God, hooray. It's no, you go talk to him. like we're going to stay down here.
Yeah. Don't touch the mountain.
Yeah, the great and terrible darkness, all that stuff. And you find Moses being this go-between, this stand-in that allows the people to get close to God. And that's the thing that you find Jesus doing in obviously a much better way. As the Son of God and a human being, he really can draw us together to God. But for me, you can't get past the Passover lamb.
Yeah. I mean, it's like the ultimate one, right?
And I think that you're able to draw out so much beauty of Christ. It's my go-to story. I tell this story to my kids sometimes when I want to give them some assurance, and I just say, look, because when you're reading scripture, sometimes these are epic stories. You can forget that there are real people involved. And there were real people, real descendants of Abraham who had to go into their house and put this blood on a doorway and go, I hope the angel of death doesn't kill my son tonight. And one of them probably was really confident. It's like, yep, God's going to do it. He's done it before. He's going to do it again. And another one was probably really freaking out. And I don't know, the angel of death sounds terrifying. What
if there's not enough blood on the door? What if I don't do it right?
Exactly. And the beauty is that it didn't matter how they felt about it. It mattered that the blood was on the door. And I just always see the beauty of Jesus Christ in being the one whom, if you're trusting in him, it doesn't matter if your knees are knocking while you do it, or if you're, a Navy SEAL as confident as can be, and of course, it doesn't matter. It's him that matters. And there's a beauty there that Exodus brings out in a way that maybe, just saying that out loud can't bring out, but the story can bring it home to your heart.
I don't know if I've ever thought of this before, but just as you were talking, I was thinking about the connection between how God provided deliverance for Abraham's son, right? And then how through the Passover, he provided deliverance for the nation's sons, right? And this was like their firstborn sons. And ultimately he did it by instead of providing the deliverance, stepping in himself, right? His son, God himself, sending his son as the means, as the only way that we could have that ultimate deliverance, that new and better Moses. And so you see these themes, these strings that get connected book to book everywhere when we slow down enough to read and just consider them, even look for them.
It's because it's all part of one large story. That's what we're doing here in the Bible Cohort, is showing you that large story and how every smaller story that's a part of it can feed into that story that all eventually points to Christ. But hopefully some of these things, when you read the book of Exodus and you're seeing Moses go up the mountain, you're hearing an echo of Jesus, connecting you back to God. And when you're reading about the plagues, you're hearing an echo of Jesus fighting the principalities and powers through his own sacrifice to deliver you from your slavery to sin, Satan, and death. Hopefully there's ways that you're seeing this big story all point to Jesus. And these conversations we have help you read it because, like we said last time, the Bible is God's story, and it's also your story. We're living in this story. We're inheritors of this story, and it helps us see Jesus, know who God is, and know how to live in his world. And so we hope this has been a blessing to you, and we'll see you next time.